Hello, college football fans, and welcome to episode 5 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and with me here today is my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Good evening.
That's right. We are coming to you live from, or not so live, I guess, live as we're recording, from beautiful LA, Los Angeles, as well as Traverse City, Michigan, on the opposite sides of the country.
That's right. Our new reality, Alex.
That's true. We're getting a good mix of, cultures here. Good mix of time zones.
Yes.
All right. So we are, for those who don't know, we are a college football podcast by college football fans for college football fans. And today we're going to be talking about 3 different levels of topics. We're going to talk about national news, some Big Ten news, as well as some Nebraska-specific news, since that's the team that we're in love with. And to start with, we wanted to talk about an issue that's been going on within the national perspective of football for quite some time, which is the whole idea of oversigning, where teams will bring on more players onto their team than they can have with the 85 scholarship limit, and then find a way either through players just naturally leaving the team or getting hurt or what have you to shrink the roster down to that 85 and thus having only the 85 best players that they can get on the roster.
That's right, Alex, and that's kind of our national subject for this week. And I wanted to mention a couple of things right away. Would you go over our podcast location and email real quick so that if anybody who's maybe catching us for the first time knows how they might be able to get in touch?
All right. Well, we can find our podcast at footballthrowdown.podomatic.com. That's the website where we put up. We also are on iTunes under College Football Throwdown. And you can email us at huskerpete13@gmail.com if you ever want to leave us an email, a question, comment, critique. We always like to hear from you guys. And before we dive into the oversigning discussion, I thought I might as well uncork our beer here. I have it for today, so I'll do the honors. All right. Might be a little quieter because this is a bottle, but see, I'm being authentic. I
yes,
forget
you are.
Who it was that was complaining about that you were using a can. All right. So, oversigning, what were your thoughts?
Well, Alex, on the subject of oversigning, the bottom line is it's using the various methods that already exist within the structure of the NCAA's rule book to find ways to move players along and put them into categories like medical hardship and things like that allow them to roster manage. And this oversigning concept has become a real science in recent years, to the point where there are examples of teams, and I'm gonna pick on a couple of SEC teams here because they tend to be the most egregious abusers of this methodology, primarily because their conference allows the most liberal use of these tools. And so you have a circumstance, for example, last year, I'm more aware of it because our senior class, our graduating classes, were quite similar in size, but Alabama had like 13 graduating seniors after this past football season, 2014-2015 season. And yet they signed a class that was like 25, 26 players in size. So basically going into their off season, they were faced with being about 8 or 10 players above the 85 scholarship limit if you counted all the players on their roster who still had remaining eligibility, combined with the number that were coming in and were expected to join the team. Mm-hmm. And so when you oversign by that number of players, then you kind of play it out through the whole spring and summer, and then at this time of year, and that's why I'm bringing it up now, this is the make or break time. This is the shit or get off the pot time for these roster management activities, and they start guiding players to various other schools, encouraging people to go to a lesser school or whatever, so that they can hit that 85 scholarship limit and get down to that number in time for the beginning of fall camp or whatever the deadline is within the NCAA. I can't remember if it's the beginning of fall camp or the beginning of school, but it's one of those 2 days typically in August that they have to be at 85. But they spend the vast majority of the year way above that 85 limit. Now contrast that to a lot of other institutions that are a much more conservative in how they approach that, so that they're not forcing kids out the back door, where basically they generally are going to start most seasons below the 85 scholarship limit. They're going to start a typical season, in that 82, maybe even 79 range, because of attrition that naturally happens. Now, these schools that are doing the oversigning are able to pretty much manage their roster down to 85 every time, because they pretty much oversign so that they can guarantee themselves a full 85 allotment of true scholarship athletes at the beginning of every season. Mm-hmm. And how that is all managed is right now very imbalanced from conference to conference.
Right.
So that's my summary of what's going on. And this is the time of year when that's going on. And this is the time of year when, frankly, if you wanted to be a good investigative journalist, that somebody should be looking into that and doing some comparisons. And there's a great website called oversign.com that people should go visit if they're not familiar with this concept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it is definitely one of the more pressing issues, I think, one of the pressing issues facing college football right now, because it just gives the teams that do it more liberally are able to have that competitive advantage, because, like you say, if, Purdue has 80 kids on their scholarship list because of fatigue and just general kids leaving or whatever, versus Alabama, who has 85, because they've culled it down specifically to like the 85 players that they think are the best, or and the ones that just leave for a variety of reasons. That just gives them that much more of a competitive advantage, that many more players they can use, for their team. And the fact that I feel like one of the reasons why it's so hard to address, both for the media and for the NCAA, is that it's so hard to prove that, Alabama is telling X kid, hey, I'm going to set you up with this junior college school, and you'll be able to play for my friend there, and you'll do great. So I'm going to push you out the door that way. It's hard to prove that conversation actually happened. That kid was really forced to go versus, that he decided to go on his own, or was he given money, to do that or whatever. It gets into these weird gray areas, and it's very hard to prove any of that.
You hit it on the head. That's exactly right. And so the fundamental, though, the character, the intent of the rule is to protect student athletes who, in fact, are legitimately injured, and protect them from losing their scholarship just because they can no longer play the sport. And that is a completely legitimate thing, and I would never want to see that go away. But when we begin to use it for this, to basically leverage our roster numbers so that we can then, as a coach, kind of cull the herd and make sure that my best and healthiest 85 are available to me at the beginning of fall camp every year, you're kind of abusing the kids and using them as these chips and pawns, and some of those kids who were promised an education and were given the glory visit and all that, are then 2 years later or 3 years later being escorted out the back door quietly so that he can hit his 85 scholarship limit. To me, is just simply an unacceptable compromise of what the student athlete and what college football is supposed to be about. Mm-hmm. And I just want to see, I can understand that there needs to be some degree of oversigning for what can be predictably the natural attrition that happens every year for a variety of reasons. But that number isn't 10. It's not 10 out of 85. And so that number needs to be managed, and I think it should be managed across the board by at least all 5 of the power conferences. Now that they've kind of broken away, I believe that there needs to be consistency in how those 5 conferences manage that particular subject, so that no one conference has that advantage. Right now, there is huge disadvantages because the Big Ten, in my opinion, is trying to do the right thing by protecting the student athlete. When somebody comes to the to the campus and asks for a scholarship and receives that scholarship from that university, that should mean something to them.
Right, that it's a commitment.
They're putting effort into the school work to keep their grades up and everything like that. You shouldn't be able to pull their scholarship out from underneath them like that.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree, and it gets back to an issue we talked about on a previous podcast about, the NCAA being like the minor leagues for the NFL, versus like that way of viewing the sport versus viewing it as the student from the perspective of the student athlete. It's all philosophically, it all kind of hinges on that argument.
Exactly. So I've hit on that subject. I hope I maybe strike a chord with some of the people that are listening to the podcast. And if you want to, you can go to oversign.com and take a look at some of the data. I mean, effectively, what it represents, to kind of put it into perspective, is over any given 5-year period of time, 5 years being including a redshirt year. So that would be the roster time frame that most players find that they're in a football team. Now, in that 5-year window, the typical schools of the SEC, which have the more liberal rules, are signing approximately one additional recruiting class every 5 years. That's what it amounts to. When you look at the number of scholarships that are provided to students over the course of 5 years, it ends up being 20 to 25 and sometimes upwards of 30 more scholarships than the averages from the Big Ten and some of the other conferences, the Big 12, etc. Although now all these other conferences are slowly increasing their number because they're recognizing that's a huge advantage that the SEC has been enjoying here for the last decade or so.
All right, and now we're going to transition it into the Big Ten topic for this week. On our previous podcast, episode 3, we talked with Brian Clower about the Big Ten East and where teams kind of stacked up within that division of the conference. So we thought now was a good time to talk about the Big Ten West and where preseason rankings are putting the different teams and where we think that things are going to fall this time around.
Okay, so first thing maybe would be a quick summary of what most of the experts, and I think we generally shared the view that the top two teams in the East were likely to be Ohio State and Michigan State in that order. And then there's quite a bit of, I think, room for debate about who ends up third and fourth. Is it Michigan or Penn State? So I think that pretty much sums up where those top four are likely to be, with Michigan being the one that's maybe the most susceptible to having that transitional year where they falter a little bit, and maybe someone like Maryland, steps up, or Indiana or whoever, and sneaks in there in that fourth position. But that's pretty much how the top of that side of the division is likely to play out.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
But then we would shift gears into the West.
Yeah, universally, Ohio State is the number one team in the Big Ten because they're, in many people's minds, the number one team in the nation.
Right. Yeah, there's not a lot of argument right now on that subject.
Yeah.
But that's why we play the games.
It's true. Anything can happen.
Yep.
And then for the West, on the site I'm looking at right now, which is athlonsports.com, they have the West ranked with Wisconsin number 1, Nebraska number 2, Minnesota 3, Iowa 4, Northwestern 5, Illinois 6, and Purdue number 7.
Yep, and that's pretty consistent. In fact, I looked up a site that also included ESPN and the Sporting News and let's see here, a couple of others, and all of them across the board had Wisconsin winning the Big Ten West. So they seem to be, at least in the early going here, the consensus pick for the Big Ten West. Now, again, the optimistic Husker in me would like to think that we have as many reasons to believe we're capable of winning the Big Ten West as Wisconsin does. But I would also flip side of that, both Wisconsin and us have a number of question marks, including new coaching staffs that could change up, that, right?
Mm-hmm. For sure.
So,
And it's
so
perfectly reasonable, like we just talked about on the previous podcast, that there's a lot of question marks at Nebraska. Not only just with Riley in general, but also we still don't know exactly what's going on with the quarterback position. We have a couple areas where we have some young guys coming in, maybe not as much depth as we would like in a roster. So there definitely are holes that can be exploited. Could be exploited if the season played out a certain way.
exactly right. And really, if you look at in terms of program stability and kind of a trend that's already been established, it's Minnesota. And so Minnesota is that kind of that dark horse that I think is a very legitimate contender for the Big Ten West division, because again, they do have a couple of tough games they have to play in conference that might derail them a little bit. But if they can hold service, if you will, in their games against Nebraska and Wisconsin, I think they would still ultimately control their own destiny. I think Iowa is a team that appears to be likely to take a step back. Northwestern is a bit of an enigma. I don't know what to expect from them. I really don't. And then Purdue is still fighting that uphill battle. And from all the things going on, or that at least we're hearing about with Illinois, they're a team that has some talent, but you just question whether that particular program is heading in a positive direction.
Has there been some news with Illinois recently? I haven't really been following that.
Yeah, their head coach has finds himself embroiled in a bit of a controversy, whereas there's been a few players who have recently left the program, who have expressed publicly that they were not treated properly, abusive, if you will, was the term. And so he's out there having to kind of defend his methods as a coach, and it's kind of called into question. They're not winning very much on the field, and all of a sudden he's got some players quitting and speaking to the media or speaking on social media about how they were treated, and it doesn't speak favorably of that coach and his kind of threatening style of motivation.
Mm-hmm. I see. Yeah. Well. Yeah. I'm not personally. I'm not super concerned about Illinois and Purdue in terms of being tough opponents. But every other team on the roster, Northwestern and Iowa have tripped Nebraska up in the past. So you can't, even if they maybe are a little down this year, you can't totally overlook them. They could totally surprise us.
Absolutely. I mean that's the thing, is that when I look at this division, I would have to honestly say that if I'm looking at the roster and the stability and all those kinds of things, I would probably have to pick Wisconsin, just because recent history says Wisconsin beats us, and that we would fall in line at that number two, just like a lot of these national publications have placed it. But I think it's not at all an upset if it turns out that Nebraska wins that division. Now, again, I would say Minnesota is the team that both Nebraska and Wisconsin need to fear a little bit. Now, I don't know Wisconsin-Minnesota's game and where it's played. I didn't look at that particular schedule to determine, but I do know that we play Minnesota up in Minnesota, so that becomes a very pivotal game for Nebraska.
That's right. Any final thoughts on these preseason rankings? Personally, I think Wisconsin 1, Nebraska 2, Minnesota 3 is a very reasonable ranking for how the season's going to go. Obviously, as a Nebraska fan, I hope that we manage to find a way to beat Wisconsin, and win the games we need to win to get to the championship. But it could very easily go Wisconsin's way, I think.
I would agree. The only advantage, of course, is that the Wisconsin game is in Lincoln this year, and so we do have the advantage of playing the game here at home, or in Lincoln rather. And so that should give us a little bit of an advantage just because of that home field. And
Hmm.
so hopefully that's the lever arm. But that means we would have to pretty much win out because Wisconsin's schedule is quite favorable and a little easier, frankly, than ours. So we don't have any room for mistake because we play Michigan State, and that Michigan State game could be a big deal.
Hmm. It's going to be a big game to look forward to. And
Yeah.
now we want to transition over to a comment we got on the Podomatic website a few weeks ago from AJ. He said, good stuff, guys. Future discussions maybe about the change in defense at NU. And so we wanted to kind of transition into our Nebraska topic for this week and talk about what the changes have been in terms of our defensive strategy since Bo left.
Right. Now, so bottom line here is I don't want to dive in too deeply just because I think that number one, I don't want to claim to know more than I really know, and number two, we want to keep this pretty simple and straightforward, and maybe we can go into greater detail, as we learn more about the specific scheme that they're going to implement. But the significant change, from what I can draw in my research, is that historically here in recent years, and frankly, not just with Bo Pelini's tenure, but the traditional method of defense in most of the history of college football would have been one of containment, one where most defensive schemes were designed to funnel the flow of the offense into the middle of the field, into the middle of the defense, so that basically you would be directing the flow of the offense into where more players were, so you could clutter things up and make a tackle, and you'd be chasing a player into your other teammates. That's the basic containment philosophy of defense. Now, these newer defenses have a second philosophy, and that's the one that is favored by Coach Banker, who is our new defensive coordinator, which is referred to as a spill defense. And its philosophy changes that concept almost on its head to some extent, in that their vision is to push folks to drive them parallel, that the offense is pushed towards the sidelines, using the sideline as kind of almost a 12th man and trying to stretch people out. So you're basically filling gaps inside so that you force that running back or that running scheme to run to the outside, and then you're expecting your flow of your defense from the other side of the field and from the secondary to basically drive that guy to the sidelines and ultimately out of bounds before he makes very much forward progress.
Mm-hmm.
And so the concept would be to kind of force quarterbacks to throw passes that are going to be on the outside corners, which is one of the hardest throws to make, and or force running plays to the outside. So that changes the entire defensive rules for any defensive player, not to basically drive them from maintaining control and leverage on an outside shoulder to maybe maintaining control and leverage on the inside shoulder to force that running back, for example, to bounce to the outside of you rather than bouncing to the inside of you. And so that philosophy is literally the exact opposite of what our players have been using. And so the question is, how effective can our coaching staff be about re-instructing and getting that to where that's so second nature that it's instinctive for our players to do it that way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is.
Does that make sense to you?
Oh yeah, it makes sense, and that I kind of learned about the spill defense before. It is interesting because, in theory at least, that kind of defense really prioritizes speed. How quickly can you get to the outside? And historically, Nebraska hasn't been a football team that's known for its great speed. Like even the classic games in the 90s, Miami was the team that everybody was talking about because they were so athletic and fast, whereas Nebraska was more the physical team that would just, ground it down your throat. So it's kind of a difference in perception of how we see the black shirts as well.
Right, exactly. And so the question is how quickly can our players embrace that and ultimately, become really, really good at it so that it's second nature.
Right. Well, and we had talked in the past. One of the great things about Bo was that he had a great defensive mind and he had this unique scheme that in his early years, especially when he had great players like Ndamukong Suh on our team, were able to stop these spread offenses that were taking over the country and really dominate people. But then, as time went on, as offenses adjusted a bit to what Bo was doing, and our players kind of struggled with the complexity of what his scheme required. You'd see guys on the field, looking to the sidelines, trying to figure out what to do. Maybe seeing some of that confusion playing just because the system was so complex in their heads. And it could be argued that a more simple defense, that's more not simple in terms of how effective it can be, but simple in terms of what it asks of the player to make split seconds decisions on, could be very advantageous to us.
Absolutely. And so it's a combination of making those reads simple and then getting those players to react instinctively because speed becomes less important if you've got the guys out there being able to be decisive and moving with the first step direction. Because if not, if their feet are in quicksand, as they say, and they're still trying to figure out what my read is supposed to be, or a defense can create that period of indecision and confusion, then you've lost as a defense. And that's kind of played out for us in recent years against Wisconsin, where we would defend them well until they found a particular play or series of plays that worked, and then we would completely blow up and couldn't stop the Little Sisters of the Poor on that play from that point forward for the rest of the game. And that kind of just fundamental and almost complete breakdown in discipline and ultimately confidence and execution, is unacceptable. And so we're hoping that with this new staff, they're going to bring a method of a simplicity that allows those players to just react instinctively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and transitioning another facet of the new coaching staff that we have to deal with here at Nebraska is our new offensive coordinator and the new type of offense that we'll be running. And that's been kind of kept a little bit under wraps. We don't really know exactly what the strategy is going to be, the philosophy going forward, because during the spring game they played a very vanilla, standard plays, not really showing off very much of what we might be doing in the future, partially maybe to just obscure it to the media and to our fellow rival teams, but also probably because of the simple fact that they haven't had the time to really teach the kids whatever this new system is. They had so little time during spring that they couldn't quite transition them fully to that new way of thinking.
Exactly right. And so the one of the big question marks for us going into this season is going to be, what type of offense are we really going to run? How much are they going to transition away from what our offensive coordinator Langsdorf and Coach Riley have historically done, which tended to be more of a pass-based offense rather than a run or athletic quarterback-centered offense, which is what we've been running, during the Bo Pelini years. And so the question is, we've got round pegs and square holes type of deal, and so the problem is, what are we going to do about that? Are we going to introduce more running than has historically been a part of the quarterback role for Mike Riley's offenses, or are we going to instead, kind of force that new concept in and just find the quarterback that we have on the roster that best executes what they want to do? And it seems that they have kind of already indicated that they're hitching their wagon to Tommy Armstrong as our starter in all likelihood, and that they're going to use his athleticism to the extent that they can. And so they're the ones that are adjusting their concept to match what our talent that is on campus can do. And I think that's the wisest way to approach it. And with their history and experience, I believe they can do that very effectively. But it's still an unknown as to exactly what that balance is going to be.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think it wouldn't be good for them to come in and ask Tommy Armstrong to start throwing it all over the place, because the simple fact of the matter is we don't have that much confidence in his arm. He's made some great passes, but he's also shown the repetitive ability to, or lack of ability to maybe make the split second decisions you need to in the pocket, to go through your progressions and set your feet right, those kind of basic passing quarterback things. And I'm sure that the new quarterback coach that we have has been drilling that into his head. I'm sure he'll be better at that this season than he was last. But I don't think it would be good to totally change the offensive philosophy when you have a quarterback like that already implanted in your system. Now, maybe a few years down the road, Riley will work with what he has right now, but maybe he's going to start recruiting that kind of quarterback and those sorts of other offensive talents to try to transition us from where we are right now into that sort of system, if that's what he really wants to do.
And one of the great strengths of having Mike Riley as our coach is he's actually been a coach who's coached within offensive systems as head coach that were very run centric, where he had 1,000-yard rushers, and then a year later had the leading receiver, in the Pac-12. So he's a guy that has been able to take whatever talent was most productive on his team and maximize it. And so you would expect that's what he's going to do again this year. It's just a matter of what does that look like, and is it going to have an identity? Because again, I would say that as Nebraska fans, one of the things we would be critical of our previous offensive coordinator and Bo, whose ever fault that was, our offense did not tend to have much of an identity. We had a hodgepodge of offensive capabilities, and we just kind of threw them on the wall to see what would stick, as opposed to building what would appear to be a logical game plan and a constructive, counter type of game plan. It was much more of a sporadic thing, and so it'll be interesting to see how much more organized this group is.
Yeah, I remember there was one section of games during Sean Watson's run where we did some Wildcat stuff, and I remember you were really excited about that, liking the results those plays were getting, and hoping that maybe we do more of that, implement that as a permanent staple of our game plan. And then that never really ended up happening. We barely saw it again.
Right, and well, until he left and we got a new offensive coordinator, but then we had that, and we had some wonderful elements, but then they weren't put together in a logical way that led you to believe that we had an identity, and so that was always kind of the struggle. But I can't say that I would ever accuse Tim. Oh gosh,
Tim Beck.
I'm already forgetting our old offensive coordinator name, but he's now at Ohio State, and it'll be interesting to see how he does as co-offensive coordinator there. To see if he can meld and get somebody who maybe understands the whole formulation of a game plan, and then take his creativity and his breadth of offensive skill and put it all together. If he does, then watch out. Ohio State's going to be even more prolific.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up this episode. I think we covered some good topics today.
Yeah.
If you guys enjoyed this podcast, you can email us at huskerpete13@gmail.com. You can subscribe to us on iTunes under College Football Throwdown. Visit footballthrowdown.podomatic.com is our website another website where we host the podcast. And thank you for being here to talk with me about this, Dad. I think this was a good show. We covered some good topics, both Nebraska and not.
Right. Hey, and is it also under College Football Throwdown, or is it just Football Throwdown?
It's the website is Football Throwdown because I didn't want to make it College Football Throwdown because that's much longer to type.
I get it. All right.
See, I have that 21st century mindset here.
Yes.
All right. Very good. Well, thank you for listening, college football fans, and we will see you next time.